1 point for each ACE score. You get 1 point for each ACE score. So for example, they found that as your ACE score reaches about 4, when your ACE score is about 4, your risk of being suicidal increases 12 times that of somebody whose ACE score would be 0. And your risk of being developing cancer is doubled. By the time your ACE score reaches about 8, your suicidal risk increases 20-fold, and your cancer risk triples. And this was remarkable because they found that you would think that if someone is traumatized as a child, it's understandable why they would have, for example, psychological issues, you know, like depression or anxiety or PTSD. That makes sense, right? But they found there's a correlation between childhood trauma and even physical illness as well. And the question is, why on earth would childhood trauma cause all of these issues? And it came down to what the researchers described as chronic toxic stress. You all know what stress is. And when something is toxic, you know, that it's really, 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 really bad. Like it poisons you, okay? So to break it down for you in simple terms, you see, I don't like, you see what this COVID thing, man, it make you have meetings with all of this Zoom thing, everybody muted. I don't see anybody's face. I don't know expressions. I can't get any feedback, but have you heard about this thing called the fight or flight response? Anyone? Anyone? You see, I'm like kind of vacuum. I like to interact with people.
Yes,
So I need to know.
yes.
You've heard about that? Good. Under normal circumstances, when you're stressed or you face danger, you will experience a fight or flight response. And that's the body's response to stress to either make you fight or run away. In any way you take it, you're looking at some way to preserve yourself. It's a life-saving mechanism, a life-saving reaction. So for example, if you're at home and you hear a loud knocking on your door or your window, you hear a gunshot and somebody breaks into the house, your heart is going to start racing immediately, usually, because your body senses danger and you have these hormones in your body. You've all heard about adrenaline, right? I would imagine. Adrenaline, and there's another hormone called cortisol. Those are called stress hormones. So when the adrenaline level increases, what it does, it makes your heart race. You've all heard about adrenaline, right? Anyone?
Yeah.
So adrenaline makes your heart race. And when your heart races, what that does is that your heart pumps blood. Your heart pumps blood to your muscles. And the blood carries oxygen. So what it does, it makes your muscle, it makes you either able to fight or run away. It's a fight or flight response. Although some people freeze, that's another response. But most people either run or they fight. But after the danger goes away, the hormone levels drop and you go back to normal again. So that's a normal fight or flight response. Chronic toxic stress is, for example, having a child in a situation where that child is repeatedly exposed to trauma. So for example, you have a little girl at school and the school bell rings, you know, it's time for school to be over. But she knows that when she leaves school, she's going to go home to her dad, who's going to rape her, like every day. So the hormone levels go up, but they don't really come down, if you understand what I'm saying to you, because the threat is always there. It's a pervasive threat. So when these hormone levels remain elevated, it has been described as you turn on a car and you put a brick on the accelerator and leave it in neutral. It just revs up the car constantly. And that will wear out the car's engine. So similarly, if you have constant stress and these hormones are constantly elevated, it's going to take a toll. And it's going to take a toll on the child's brain, how the child's brain develops. But it's also going to take a toll on other organ systems as well. So you find children who are chronically stressed like this have an increased risk of developing problems with the immune system and with the endocrine system. Endocrine system is your hormone system. So you find children exposed to this, it's going to cause a long-term trauma when they're exposed to this kind of stress. Another thing that many people don't understand is that when exposed to this kind of stress, chronic toxic stress also affects your DNA. Many people don't realize this. But your DNA is something in your body that is constantly being replicated over and over and over again. You find when these hormones start to go out of whack, what happens is that the way in which your DNA is replicated starts to change. And the way certain genes are expressed also begins to change. And that's why when people are traumatized, some of these things can be passed on from generation to generation. There are multiple reasons why this can happen. So for example, persons of faith will tell you about generational curses, and they will attribute it to spiritual causes. Spiritual causes are things we can't prove or disprove them. It's very hard to prove or disprove something spiritual, but we can explain biologically how, in terms of your DNA, for example, these things can become generational. You find also that when you have this chronic stress, it affects how your cells are replicated, and it causes what we call premature cellular death, and that makes you age faster. I'm sure you've heard people talk about when people have a hard life, they kind of look old pretty quickly. Yeah. That makes sense, don't it? Because stress can age you. I mean, even in adulthood, people talk about, for example, Barack Obama when he was president, how he aged quickly when he was in the White House. So even as an adult, it can have that effect on you. So when you have a child who is traumatized, that child very often will grow up to be somewhat dysfunctional. Nobody's perfect. But the level of dysfunction depends on different things, because the thing about this thing is not an exact science. So for example, you might say to me, well, you know, I had childhood trauma and I'm not so bad. So how come it mash up she over there, so? But we have different levels of resilience, and we have different buffers as well. So for example, if you grew up in a situation where you were abandoned as a child by your biological parents, and you grew up in a children's home and you're abused, even though you had absent parents, somebody else whose parents were absent may have had, for example, an adult in their life was a buffer who looked out for them and nurtured them, and that does make a difference. So it's kind of unfair sometimes when people look on people in some situation and say, well, that happened to me, so how come in a mashup? Why she have to behave so? Because it's different. But childhood trauma has been linked to over 50 different diseases in adulthood. Because as I said, the trauma doesn't affect how the brain develops. It affects almost every organ system. So childhood trauma has been linked to mental disorders such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, bipolar affective disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and a whole range of personality disorders. Childhood trauma has been linked to obesity, hypertension, diabetes, asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, endometriosis, a whole bunch of autoimmune disease, a whole bunch of cancer. So it's important to understand this. And it's important to understand this in the context of the country we live in. Our country is a very unhealthy country. We're very aggressive. We're very violent. We're unusually aggressive and violent. Our murder rate is consistently in the top 10 globally, usually in the top 5. And when you think that they have over 200 countries in this world, is not a good thing. And what researchers have found is that we tend to have very high ACE scores in our society. Our average ACE score is relatively high. And it kind of makes sense because we fight and chase off one another over the slightest things. And when people are traumatized, that's one of the reactions. I don't know if you've ever heard this saying that hurt people. And it's true. When you're a happy person and you're content, you don't really have much time to hurt other people. If you think about it, you don't have time for that. It's important to understand in this country that we have normalized some types of child abuse and child neglect. For example, we have normalized child neglect in this country because it's a very common Jamaican expression for somebody to say, I great my granny or I great my auntie. You hear that all the time, don't it? It's common, not true.
Yeah.
The question is, why is that common? Why is that so common? Why is it that so many people in this country do not grow up with their parents? And research has shown that parental separation hurts kids.
Sure.
Many people don't even realize they're hurting. But parental separation hurts kids a lot. So for example, you find that a lot of our homes are run by single parents, and it's usually the mother. Absent mothers cause issues. So for example, when a boy grows up with an absent mother, or a mother who is abusive or dismissive or neglectful, that can color his perception of women as he gets older. And that can create problems in his relationships. So for example, suppose you grew up with a mother who was just absent and didn't give you affection, and it hurts, and then she abandons you. As a man, you grow up, or this happens in Jamaica not infrequently. You have a mother, and then one day you realize that who you thought was your father is not really your father. I know of people found that out after the father actually died. And it's a very painful thing to think that they were denied that relationship. And that can cause resentment. So you find when these men grow up now, they may have this resentment and this anger, and it's projected onto the women they are with. Their mother is the first woman they've ever had an encounter with in their life. That's their perception of womanhood. So they're in a relationship, and you find that they don't trust the women they're with. They watch them all the time. Sometimes they get violent, aggressive. That's where some of it is coming from. Similarly, when you have an absent father, that damages kids as well. You find boys need appropriate male role models. Boys need that. And when a father is absent, or an appropriate father is absent, the role models become gang leaders, area leaders, the older boys at school who may be wayward, dancehall artists, hip-hop artists. And a lot of these guys really don't promote the values that you'd want in our young men. So the absent father issue is a real thing for boys. So listen to the dancehall artists, and a lot of them reduce women to just walking vaginas, and that's why a lot of boys are socialized. That's where a lot of that comes from. And girls need their fathers too. You find that girls who grow up without a father, they tend to initiate sex earlier. The risk of teen pregnancy and STIs is much higher. The risk of having an abortion is higher. The risk of ending up in dysfunctional relationships is higher. So you all see where I'm coming from with all of this, where it's important to understand what this does. And another thing in our society, we have normalized child abuse because we beat the living hell out of our kids. Beating children has been normalized in our country. And there's something I need to share with you. It's very important to humble yourself and be respectful when it comes to data, research, evidence, and facts, because sometimes your reality may not really be what is ideal. It's important to be respectful of that, because you see, just because something is a social norm doesn't mean that it's a good thing. I have a friend from an African country, and it's a social norm where she is for girls to be mutilated. So at a certain age, that somebody in the village will take something sharp and cut off your clitoris and your inner lips, inner labia. That's the norm. And when I say cut off, I don't mean taking to an operating room and give anesthesia, let us cut it off. Her sister bled to death. But that's a social norm where she's from. When she relocated to the West, she realized that that's really not a good thing. Similarly, in this country, beating kids is a social norm. I grew up with people who believed in that. So my mother, my father, my grandmother all used to beat me, all of them. And research has shown that beating children is not in their best interest. That's a fact. Data supports that. And it's important to understand that there are other ways to discipline kids. Just because you may beat your kid doesn't mean you're a wicked or a bad person, because you're socialized that way. But the research actually is not in the best interest of our kids. And some people push back and say things like, well, I got beaten and I'm okay. I'm sure you've heard that. Many people say that. But here's the thing about that now. Let me tell you. First of all, if you got beaten and you're okay, good for you. That doesn't mean it's a good thing. For example, I could tell you that I drink rum and coke every Friday and I race my friends on the North-South Highway to OG every Friday and I've never crashed. Good for me, but that's not really a good thing. Second thing, many people say they're all right or not all right. And that's a fact too. Because if you look at research in psychology, many people with certain dysfunctions do not realize how dysfunctional they are. It's a fact. And I'm sure everybody here knows somebody who not too right and thinks that I'm righted. Sure. Donald Trump thinks I'm righted. You and I know that's something wrong. And all of you work in offices, for example, I'm sure you have people at the workplace who are either very touchy, oversensitive, narcissistic, have other kinds of dysfunctions, and they think they're quite okay, especially narcissists. They think they're quite okay. Nothing wrong with them. It's all about you. The third thing about the beaten thing is that some people will tell you, well, it's a good thing I got beaten because I came into trouble and whatever. But the research doesn't really support that. So for example, in Jamaica, in this country, we found that there was a study that showed that every single person in prison for murder had received corporal punishment. They were all beaten. So beating never stopped them from murdering people anyway. And it's important to understand these things if you want to get out of the rut we are in, because these traumas tend to be generational, as I mentioned before, for different reasons. Generational trauma is a real thing, you know. It's a real thing. And if you think about it rationally, if you are traumatized as a child and then you grow up with this and you're dysfunctional because of the trauma, and you have kids of your own, they are likely to be influenced by your irrational behavior, and that can traumatize them, and it's a cycle. So I'm going to give you some examples that you see in a public space. You've all heard about R. Kelly. Everybody here knows who R. Kelly is? Anyone?
Yes, sir.
All right. R. Kelly is an interesting person. I write a column in the Gleaner once a week, and I was going to write about people in the public space, celebrities who are survivors of trauma, and give examples of the dysfunction. But R. Kelly, there's so much in his story, I just had to write about him alone. So I'm going to give you the story. So he was born in Chicago, didn't know his father, absent father, so that's one thing. He grew up in a very strange household with a lot of women, and he was exposed to a lot of inappropriate behavior from when he was a kid. When he was 8 years old, he had a little girlfriend, he used to play with, and one day somebody pushed her into a creek and he watched her drown. That's trauma. And when he was 8 years old, one day at home, he walked in on 2 people having sex. And the woman gave him a camera and told him to take pictures of them having sex. He's 8 years old, 8 years old. And this is the kind of thing he was exposed to. He was sexually molested by an older family member, female. He was sexually molested by a male as well. When he was a bit older, like early teens or 12, he actually saw his girlfriend being sexually molested. By 12 years old, he was shot in his shoulder. So you see, I'm coming from with all of this. And apparently one of the people who molested him was molested himself as a child. So then the man grows up, he becomes a singer. And you hear all these stories about him molesting girls and traumatizing women. So you see, when these things are generational, and people often become collateral damage, by the way. So you see, it didn't just affect him. And when he affects those girls, he sexually molested these women. When they are traumatized, if they have kids, their kids run the risk of being dysfunctional too. There's another story. Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston was abused as a kid sexually. Bobby Brown had his own trauma as well. So they had a very turbulent relationship, and they had a daughter. And by the time the daughter was 21, she was dead. And if you look at her ACE score was at least 5 because she was exposed to domestic violence, drug abuse, mental illness in the home, having her father incarcerated over and over, divorce. And by the time she was 21, she was dead. So these are just examples you see in the public space. And it's very, very important to understand where these things come from, because everybody has a story. It's just that you don't know that person's story. So it's important to understand this so you can empathize with people. You need to protect yourself, but you need to empathize. It's good to empathize as well. So for example, some of these people you see, again, at the workplace or around you, who are unhappy, who are oversensitive, miserable, aggressive, they have their own stories because sometimes the trauma is manifested as aggression. I remember, I can share this story with you because she gave me permission. Y'all know who Tanya Stevens is? Singer. I remember Tanya told me a story about a girl who she was mentoring. And after a while, the girl became very belligerent and she couldn't manage her anymore. And she said, I can't deal with this man. This is just too much. And years later, when the girl became a young woman, she encountered her again. And she said to me, she told her that the reason why she started to act up is because she was being sexually molested. And when you molest kids, that's very often when it comes out because sometimes they are threatened not to tell anybody anything. They can't fight back because they're too small. So that energy can be created or destroyed. So that energy gets manifested in different ways. Another example I can tell you about, these are life experiences where I try not to judge. I remember a patient came to my office for an ultrasound. She had 4 kids for 4 different men. She was pregnant with her 5th child for a 5th man. While she was pregnant, that man died. And another man befriended her. And her plan was, after having this 5th child for the 5th man, have a 6th child for the 6th man would take her up. And we all know that's not a good idea. So I just listened to the story. And she came back a few weeks later with her friend. And I decided to ask her a question. And I find there are certain questions, when you ask people these questions, you get an insight into what's going on in their life. For example, if you ask them, what was your childhood like? Who did you grow up with? If you could use one word to describe your childhood, what would it be? So I asked her, who did you grow up with? And she said, all over the place. So, you know, that meant a certain degree of instability. So her father was absent. Her mother would abuse her physically and verbally, emotionally, because she reminded her of her father. Her mother had a boyfriend who sexually molested her. When she told her mother beat her around to the house. So I'm racking up, so I'm doing her ACE scores in my head. And I realized her ACE score was about 8. And then I said to her, I asked her another question. I asked her, when was the last time you tried to kill yourself? I didn't ask her if, I asked her when. It was the last time. And the last time was the year before. Attempted suicide, ended up on the psych ward at UWI. So it led to a conversation about her childhood and that it would be a good idea for her to get therapy, and I referred her to someone. Another example. This life is unfair enough because you realize that men are allowed to have a lot of sexual partners and it's no big deal. When women have more than one, they get all kinds of names. You notice that, don't you? Anyone? Yeah, life is unfair.
Yeah.
There's a woman I knew about. I met her, and I was told all kind of derogatory things about this woman. You know, the usual names they call women who have several partners, etc. She became a patient. And one day in my office, she just said to me out of the blue, my life changed the day I got raped. And she was 12 years old when she got raped. And she said her life changed after that. She started to do poorly in school. She started to rebel. And she started to have sex. There's a word I don't like to use, but you know, when they use the word promiscuous, she became promiscuous. And that's the thing about sexual trauma. People who are survivors of sexual trauma usually they either withdraw and avoid sex, or they become promiscuous. And she admitted that she's had sex with so many men, some of them she can't remember, but she's trying to change her life. So all of these stories I'm telling you to let you understand what trauma does and that everybody has a story. And we should try to empathize with people and not judge, because you don't know what people dealing with. Some people dealing with some real trauma, some really, really bad trauma. So the thing is, what can we do about all of this? because I don't like just talking about things without trying to offer some kind of solution. And it starts by having conversations like this, public education, and educating yourselves about yourselves and about those around you. So when I give this talk, I normally ask people to look up this lady. Her name is Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. If you go on YouTube, there's a video about adverse childhood experiences, childhood trauma. It's a TED Talk. It's not long. It's about 15 minutes. But it's very important that you understand what this does to all of us. That's the first thing. And it's important to try to destigmatize mental illness. For example, when you talk about going to see a therapist, many people think that you're implying that they're mad. Doesn't mean that you're mad. Everybody could benefit from therapy. I see a therapist the same way I see my dentist and my ophthalmologist and my GP. I go to a therapist, not a big deal. And it's important to understand this, or we're not going to change this. It's important to understand that when you hear about legislation aimed at protecting kids, like laws governing corporal punishment, that you try to educate yourself and not resist that, because all of that is very, very helpful. But it's not going to change unless and until we educate ourselves. And when we become educated, we educate others and let them understand that it's not necessary to beat up on our kids. It's important to understand the value of planning families. Family planning isn't just about taking a pill or an injection or condoms. It's about what it says. Planning a family is better to be prepared, have children when you are able to provide for them, not just financially, but emotionally as well, which is why I'm a strong advocate for comprehensive sex education in schools. Comprehensive, age-appropriate sex education. And I use those words very carefully. Comprehensive means you look at, many different aspects, and age-appropriate, because teaching kids bio, like reproductive health, like the penis goes in the vagina, ejaculate, you get pregnant, that's not really sex ed, man. It's deeper than that. It goes into principles of things like consent, respect, boundaries. These are kind of things we need to teach our kids, because you see, this is a different era from when I grew up. When I grew up, I had no access to pornographic imagery, like video imagery, when I was in prep school. Nowadays, kids, you just go online and everything is there. And if you don't guide them, they're going to get guidance elsewhere. Because if all they're seeing is images, they're going to learn about sex in a vacuum. They're going to think, okay, a man and a woman end up in a room, so we have sex. A lot of young men don't understand the concept of boundaries or respect or consent. So a lot of them are, a lot of them are growing up thinking, well, if I give a girl a food, she owe me sex, I'm entitled to it. I recently was asked to moderate the presentation of the reproductive health survey for the country for last year. And one of the interesting things I remember was, I think about 20% of men think that women don't have the right to refuse them sex, like in relationships. So it's important to educate our youth and educate ourselves. We're going about 45 minutes, man. I don't really want to talk too long, but that's the gist of most of what I want to say. But I like interaction. I don't like just giving didactic lectures to people, because I'm sure some of you have questions or comments you like to make about what I've been speaking about. So I hope you all found this useful. You see, we're doing a lot of Zoom meetings since COVID, but man, I still not used to it tonight with the silence. I didn't know people sleeping. God, what everybody doing behind them name, so God know, only God know.
We're
Only God and them
we're
know.
here.
Huh?
We're here listening.
Some people are sleeping, some people from the toilet, some people doing God knows what. I don't want to know.
We're here. We're here.
We're here. Very interesting, thought-provoking. So guys, as Dr. Abraham said, he likes to be interactive. So the floor is now open, but we can't have everybody talking at the same time. So please, and put up your hand and I would identify you. Anyone wants to make a comment, ask a question?
My hand is up.
That's Dion.
Okay, go ahead, Dion.
Okay, good evening, good afternoon, good
Hi,
afternoon.
Dion.
Hi. So I was listening to you keenly, and it's very interesting, very thought-provoking, very interesting. Some of these things, they just touch me deeply. But there's a question that I have. Oh, for example, your child, you did not grow up with a father, but at the same time, there's a grandfather in the home that is positive, that that acts as I mean, he can't replace a father because he's not a father for him, but couldn't that make a difference, in his way of growing up, living, and
No, definitely. That's what I was saying, that if you have a buffer, it makes a big difference. So for example, if you have an appropriate male role model, a grandfather, uncle, a family friend, stepfather, it makes a big difference. I mean, ideally you'd want a father, but you said it's not an exact science. And for example, sometimes it's better your father not around. If suppose your father's an abusive alcoholic,
Yes.
yeah,
probably and beats your mom is probably better that father is not around.
Yeah.
But the important thing is to have an appropriate male role model. That's very important. Very.
Okay. Another question that I have to ask, how is the best way? No one wants to know, or you said it earlier, to hear that, well, something is wrong with them, and they need help, they need counseling. What's the best way? And because normally they won't acknowledge that something is wrong. What's the best way to get a family member, whether a child or so? How do you bring it across to them when you recognize that some emotional thing is going on? How do you bring it across to them to try to get that help for them?
That's a very good question. And that's why it's so important to destigmatize mental health. But it depends on the condition you're dealing with and the personality of the person and your relationship to that person. So for example, if someone has depression, for example, and you notice that they're always late for work, they stay in bed a lot, they don't socialize as much as they used to, it's kind of easier to bring that up. Out of concern, you could say, boy, I notice you're not as vibrant as before, you stay home, you're not interacting and doing stuff. Maybe you should talk to someone. If somebody's very aggressive, it may be a bit harder to approach them. But what you could do is look at things and bring it across in a way that to let them understand that some of their behavior may be destructive to them. Because if you focus on what it does to other people, it may not reach some of them. But if you let them know that, boy, that this could be affecting you in some way, like at work or your relationship, or this has the potential to affect your income or your job stability, those are different ways of bringing it up. Another way of dealing with it is to go and speak to a therapist about the person. I find that very useful because you're a lay person. So for example, you live with a man who is very jealous and watch you all the time or whatever, and you don't know how to deal with it. You could go to a therapist by yourself first and say, listen, my partner is like this. And then when you reveal the behavior and even certain aspects of the person's childhood, the therapist may be able to tell you how best to approach that person. Because people respond to different things. Some people will tell them, but I think you need help. And they have a certain degree of emotional intelligence and insight. And they will say, it's true. Some people bring it up and their reaction is to push back and resist. And the more you talk, the less like it is they're going to go. So it may be a good idea to speak to a therapist first and say, listen, how do I approach this person? And I've given people this advice several times before. That makes sense to you, Dion?
Yes, it is, yes.
Because your way of dealing with things may not be the best way, especially if that person has a perception of you, a certain perception of you. So for example, if you're in an intimate relationship and that person's perception is that you are too nagging. No matter what,
Yes.
all them get here is nagging, you know.
Hmm.
So if you go and find out how can I best, because the therapist may even tell you to let somebody else talk to them. Like, for example, who does that person listen to? Whose ear does that person have? It could be their physician, it could be their best friend, it could be their friend them hang out with at the bar or play
Yeah.
football with. So those are different ways you could approach that.
Okay. Thank you.
That makes sense to you?
Yes, much sense.
All right.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Everybody
Come
got
on,
sleep now.
guys. Anyone else?
Okay, since no one else wants to ask, I'm asking another question. And so you have your child and they don't grow up with a father. So in turns, they have children. Now that child is gone away from the children, but the children are around females. When I say female, I mean grandparents or the mother. How do you, now there's a shortage of a father figure. Even though the grandparents show the child love or the children love and they try to show them love, emotional love and all of that. And wouldn't there be something that's missing, growing up in the years to come, and can that affect them? How can it affect them? And how do you kind of replace the father figure or somebody? What can you do to really balance?
I mean, the best you can do is that if you have appropriate men in your life to,
Okay.
to have a relationship with a child, that's the best advice I have to give. I mean, some people have a wide network. Some people's networks may be smaller. It just to do the best you can do within your network.
Okay. And so they don't necessarily would lacking in, that they would be like disruptive, maybe not. But you
Yeah,
just show them
you see, it depends on the child's personality and what kind of buffers they have.
okay.
Because human behavior is very complex, and some part of it, your behavior is determined not just by experiences, but by genetic makeup as well. So some people may be naturally more resilient than others. Some people have a void that affects them for the rest of their life. Some people are able to kind of move on and not allow that to affect them that much. But everybody different. Like, for example, in some families, for example, I read a story about these two guys, and the father was an alcoholic. And one grew up and became an alcoholic, and the other one grew up and totally avoided alcohol. So sometimes one child will go along the same pathway. Another will sit a folly and say, I'm not going that way at all, man. I'm going 180 degrees the other way because I see what destruction that can cause.
Yes. Interesting.
Well, I have a question.
Thank you, Dion. Okay, go ahead, Pansy.
Okay, Dr. Michael, what are some of the red flags we parents can notice about our children that are being abused or sexually abused?
Thanks a lot.
Having problems, and how can we identify it, and what can parents do to help these kids?
Changes in behavior, and they vary. So for example, if a child becomes more withdrawn, if a child becomes more aggressive, if the child appears to be sad, if the child appears to become hypersexual, so if the child displays sexual behavior that's inappropriate or incongruent with their age, those are all red flags. Or if you find a child has an aversion to going towards a certain family member, family friend, that's a big red flag. That's a big one. I remember a patient telling me once that her grandmother, I think, had a shop, and There was this man who used to be at the shop, and her grandmother used to like force her to like be friendly to the man. But she didn't want to go to the man. She always resisted going because when her grandmother was not really around, he'd put his hand up her clothes and molest her. But the grandmother was like, this is Uncle so and so, he must be decent, you must be respectful and tell him hello and whatever. And no. So when you see kids pulling away from certain people, that could be a red flag as well.
Yeah.
Especially if they had a better relationship with that person before, and you notice they want to avoid that person. That's a red flag. That the sexual behavior, the aggression, yeah, and our sadness. Because the children can't fight back. And when a child is violated and has all this anger, man, they may not be able to fight the person who is molesting them because number one, the person has more power in every way.
And influence, right?
So other things become collateral damage. Sometimes the kids at school become collateral damage. A lot of bullies are kids who are being abused. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah.
A lot of kids who are
Yes,
bullies.
literally.
Because they can't take it out on the big people, so they take it on the smaller ones. I remember when I was in school, there was a kid who used to be a bully, and he would fight a whole lot. A whole lot. So you fast forward many, many, many years later, many. And I was in a parking lot one day and somebody came to beg money, looking very disheveled. And it was him. You know, when people look like they're on drugs? So then you fast forward some years again. One of my kids at prep school, and I encountered him at prep school because his daughter was going to the same prep school as my daughter, and we bonded again. I remember the day when I saw him in the parking lot and I said, you remember me from school? And his response was, which one? Because he'd gotten expelled from so many. And I reminded him, and we started to talk again. And one day we had a convo and he said to me, you know, I wish my father was around more when I was a kid. Because he was always in lodge meeting and board meeting and all kind of things. And I said, yeah, man, I knew something was wrong. Because he had this void. And God knew what else was happening in his childhood. Because more than likely, you know, other things were happening as well. Because I used to hear he used to abuse his wife as well. So I didn't know what was going on. But when kids are abused, man, any number can play after that. And what happens is that we often set a cycle in motion that just keeps being perpetuated.
Thank you. Anyone else? The floor is open. Dion?
Yes. How do you actually know is it the score, is it IQ score? Was it that?
Go ahead.
Right. Is it you look at the things that you've been through, you count them, and then
What you mean the ACE score? ACE. You mean the ACE score?
Thank you.
Yeah, man. You can look it up. I mean, basically, to put it simply, I can tell you. There are 10 ACEs, right? The initial study showed 10, but actually more. Because the 10 they looked at were under 3 headings: abuse, neglect, and exposure to dysfunction in the home. So they looked at under abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, under neglect, physical and emotional neglect, and under exposure to dysfunction in the home, exposure to things like domestic violence, drug abuse, mental illness, having a family member being incarcerated or divorce or separation. That's 10. That's 10.
Okay.
And they've subsequently found out other ACEs. For example, extreme poverty, extreme hunger, being exposed to war, that kind of stuff. Bullying.
Okay.
Yeah. But those are the first 10. And many people can kind of figure what the ACE score is by thinking about those 10.
Okay. When is it extreme? Is 3
it becomes
Freeze.
significant when you reach like about when you reach about 4, it
Four
becomes
is not bad.
when you reach about 4, it starts to become significant.
Dr. Abraham?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, when it reaches
Okay.
4, it starts to become significant.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Thank you, Dr. Abrams. All right, so sorry, I'm getting over the flu, so please forgive me. But two school of thoughts came to me when you were doing the presentation, and even in your interaction with Dion. And it's because I've been very close to a particular situation wherein when you mentioned if a father is not a good father, it really makes no sense that he's in the picture. Sometimes you see these abusive relationships and you wonder why the woman stays. And you know, when you ask the question, they will tell you the children need a father. And when you know, sometimes you put in your little word or two and you will say, but if the father is abusive, what kind of role model is that man to the child? Yeah. Isn't it better you have the father doing visiting and all of those things than having him in the home abusing you and also abusing the kids? And most times, I don't know if it is an excuse for them, but most times they're always saying they're doing it for the kids. But I really don't think it is for the kids. Honestly, I don't think it is for the kids.
It's a dilemma. It's a dilemma because it's a dilemma, and I empathize with people sometimes with that, because on one hand, you want the child to grow up with both parents, but on the other hand, it can put the child at risk, or even you at risk. Yeah. Because one of the ace things is, for example, domestic violence. And if you stay with the man, child is going to see the man abusing you. And that puts the child at risk, being exposed to that level of violence. You know? On the other hand, you might leave, and some men are vindictive. When you leave, they say, well, if you leave, I leave, you know, you and the kid can't go, I'm in a business. No. But it's a dilemma though. But when it comes to something that could risk your health and your child's health, sometimes it's best that you just not be in that space. Not be in that space. Yes. And again, that's where the ace thing come in again, you know, because let me tell you, for example, kids who have been exposed to toxic relationships and domestic violence tend have a higher risk of ending up in those relationships themselves. And for example, if you have a girl, for example, who grew up without a father to affirm her and grow up being a victim of abuse, it's not uncommon in this country for you to have a household where the father is absent and the mother has a spouse or boyfriend who sexually molests the child. That happens.
Yeah.
So sometimes when you have girls who were brought up like that and they end up in relationships, sometimes because of the absence of the father and the neglect and the exposure to the violation, their self-confidence is shattered. And when your self-confidence is shattered, sometimes you just have the strength to leave. You know, looking out from the outside, it makes sense. You will say, well, why don't just leave? Sometimes they lack the self-confidence to leave.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're threatened. And sometimes you may leave and they get killed, by the way. Because people often ridicule women and say, why don't leave? Why don't leave? But research has shown that many times women make several attempts before they finally leave an abusive relationship. And sometimes they leave and they get killed. I had a patient who got killed. She left. And eventually the man found out thing acid on her and she dead. I know someone who is in such a violent relationship, when she left, she had to just execute it the same day, take everything and leave the island right away. And if you think about it, having to leave like that is very difficult to leave everything behind and run away, you know?
Yeah, it is.
So it's best to not to start the cycle in the first place by making sure you provide nurturing environments for your kids and to choose wisely who you have kids with. it's extremely important to choose wisely. We have kids with both sexes. But like a lot of people, I guess because I'm a gynecologist, I hear women's stories more. You see the red flags, and it's amazing how people ignore red flags sometimes.
Yeah.
You with a man who has 4 kids for 4 different women, and you want to have a child with this man. Like, Jesus Christ. Like in my head, I'm like, oh my God, this is not going to end well. It's not going to end well. And because of my experience with ACEs, I often ask women, and I will ask them about their childhood. And very often women who gravitate towards those scenarios are abused themselves.
Yeah.
Almost all the time. I saw something like that very recently where someone was with this man. He had 3 kids for 3 different women or something. And I went into her childhood. That was sexual abuse, neglect, all different kind of abuse. Because a lot of women who have enough self-confidence are not going to go into that because they respect themselves more. They value themselves more. But if as a child you're being denigrated all the time and being told bad things about yourself and being mistreated, self-confidence is shattered, you know?
Yeah.
That's why it's important, again, not to judge, but to empathize. Yeah.
Another takeaway for me, I'm not the person doing the vote of thanks, but another takeaway for me was, do not be judgmental.
Yes.
Comes back to what you just said.
Yes.
You know, everything is really situational. So we're not to judge, and everybody receive something might be said, and 10 persons receive it 10 different ways.
Yeah.
Right?
True.
You'll also handle a situation 10 different ways.
True.
So it is very important for us not to be judgmental. And this is key for us as mentors on this program. You know, when our mentees come to us with particular issues, we not be judgmental about the situation, and we not see other persons out there behaving a particular way. Because the whole promiscuous scenario came back to me because I knew someone when we were going to school, and the person, she was very promiscuous, and we always wondered why she behaved like that. And you know, when you're in school and you behave a particular way, people call you all kind of names, we teased her,
Yes.
and all of those things. So after learning her story, when we grew up and learned her story, we just imagine how difficult we made it for her too, you know, teasing her and all of those things. So it really is important not to be judgmental, and yes, to watch the different signs, behavioral signs. You know, somebody is happy and all of a sudden that person just in a closet by themselves and all of those things. So it's important for us as mentors to, you know, get these takeaways from this session. And I'd really love for some of our mentees to chime in and ask some questions. Guys, this is a lifetime opportunity for us to have Dr. Abrams on, a man of a wealth of information, experience. Let us tap into it. All right. Otherwise, we're gonna have to pay for it. Okay.
Yeah, right.
All right. Colette, you can go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very interesting, informative this presentation, Dr. Abrahams. I just wondered if you can share, if you know and you can share any strategies that can be used to reach a young lady in particular who you recognize is going down the wrong path, but for example, I have no influence over her, and she's nor am I friends with her mother, because she only has a mother, no father. And essentially, I just want to know if there are any strategies that I can use to reach out to her. Because she's really, I think she's just like maybe, I do not believe she's older than 16, but I have already recognized a number of the traits that you spoke to that suggests that this young lady is very troubled.
Man, I think, how old is she?
Sorry?
How old is she?
That's it. I don't know. It's a young lady in my community. As I said, I don't know her. I only just met her mother recently because of a situation. But even when I spoke with the mother, the response wasn't positive towards her, towards taking any action to help the child.
I mean, see if
I
you
don't
can.
think she's older than 16.
Oh, I don't know. Try to find like form a bond with the child and see if you can get to speak to a therapist, as I said before, about how best to approach that. Because as much as I have an interest in this, I don't do therapy myself, but I have a lot of respect for therapists and what they do.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Emma, you're welcome.
I'd also asked if you could just put, I typed it in the chat, asking if you could put as a reminder, put the name of the.
For the lady, hold on.
The video
Yeah, man,
that you asked us to.
definitely.
I did. Search on YouTube
Yeah.
for Dr. Nadine Burke Harris.
Yeah, man, that's it. That lady changed my life. She's a hero to me. So changed my life. That TED Talk is invaluable, trust me.
Okay, thank you. Miss Lawrence, you can go ahead.
Okay, Colette, we do have a therapist in our mentorship group who is Dr. Howard Harvey. If you need his contact, I can share that with you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jack.
Okay. And Dr. Abrams, so tell me, experiencing trauma or significant adversity during childhood, can this lead to some psychological effects, just such as anxiety or depression when in your adult days?
Yeah, definitely. I said earlier, man, there's a host of mental health issues that trauma can cause. And they include anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar affective disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and a whole bunch of personality disorders, like borderline personality disorder. So yeah, definitely. The effects range from mental to physical, from mental problems to obesity to a whole bunch of stuff. And when you study trauma, it's very interesting, you know. Like, for example, I remember reading about some people who are obese, who are survivors of trauma, like sexual trauma. And part of the reason why they're obese is because, for example, there's a woman I'd read about, and she had lost weight with this weight loss program and put it right back on. And in therapy, it came out that she actually felt more comfortable being obese because she felt like the more weight she had on, the less attractive she was, and the less likely it would be for her to be raped or assaulted. There's another gentleman who I read about who had lost weight, gained it back because he felt more comfortable being big, because it would be less likely that somebody would attack him or try to bully him. It's very interesting when you look at human behavior. Very.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, guys, if there are no more questions or comments, we want to thank Christine. You've unmuted. Do you want to make a comment or ask a question? No. Okay. All right. So at this time, we're gonna ask Ms. Pansy Taylor to give us the vote of to give Dr. Abrams the vote of thanks for us.
Okay.
Dr. Abraham, very, very good friend of mine. On behalf of
Oh, is you body mom?
No, man, I did anything for Pansy, man. She not bad me up at all. I love her.
I never bad your body up. All right.
oh God. On behalf of Eagle Wings Program, founder Jackie Lawrence, mentors, mentees, and other members of the group, guests, we express our sincere gratitude to you and your authentic message that you bring across on this platform. Very informative, very interested, it's inspiring. And we are forever grateful to you to take this moment of your busy lifestyle to talk to us. Actually, we are looking forward to invite you again.
Sure.
To do another Poor Talk. And the Poor Talk, when you finish the Poor Talk, we need you to give us some joke.
A joke, yeah, look, man.
That we can laugh after that powerful talk. We are happy to have you. And it was very, very, as I said, it was very interesting, to hear all of these things. Give us a penny for our thoughts. We can think about this and how we to address our children that is going through depression and abuse and everything. Thank you so much to be on the platform of Eagle Wings, and we are looking forward to invite you again. So have yourself a pleasant afternoon, and thank you.
Before I go, this is totally unrelated, but I need to share this with you. So you have some scammers around the place using my image to promote something that doesn't exist. They're doing it to a bunch of us, okay? So I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you something. Hold on 1 minute. Because people have lost their money and come asking me when they can get their money back. I mean, I don't know about that. Hold on 1 minute. This can be your killer. My name is Dr. Michael Abrahams. This? I have been studying heart and vascular problems for 14 years. Can you hear that? You know, hypertension is a truly terrible
Yes, Mr. Englishman.
So what?
Yes, Mr. Englishman.
So I did a video years ago, an interview. And they took the interview, doctored the interview to make it look like I'm talking about a product called BloodGuard that does not exist. And what they do is you go on and if you buy a bottle for $39.99, they charge you for 5 bottles and take $200 US off your credit card and disappear.
Hey.
If you see anything with me promoting anything, Dr. Alfred Dawes, Judy Mowat, Marcia Griffiths, Johnny Daly, Dr. Wendell Abel, Michael Leachin, Kalila Reynolds, Deion Jackson Miller, Delia Harris. If you see anything with any of us promoting anything to get money, it's a scam.
That's so much, my God.
Oh, I saw the one with Judy Mowat.
Judy Mowat as well.
Yes.
Judy did an interview. So I have an interview with Judy saying I treated her. When I talked to Judy, Judy freaked out because I never treat Judy in my life.
I saw Dr. Abrams and I was planning to get in touch with you personally.
Yeah, Judy and I talk now. But Judy doesn't even have hypertension, much less for me to treat her.
Oh my, I saw it, ridiculous.
That's what happens when you have a high ACE score. You go up dysfunction and you try to rip people off.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but
thanks a lot.
From I heard yours, I know it wasn't true. Well, first thing, the lip thing and the sound that's coming out wasn't in sync. And because you don't have an accent.
Yeah, because you have sense. Everybody have sense.
Well.
Thanks for inviting me. I'll see you ladies soon again, gentlemen. Thanks a lot.
Okay, and thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay,
bye. Okay, our mentors, mentees, before you leave, please, we have a little bit of housework to do. As you guys know, our mentorship week is coming up, right? This starts on August 18th. Our community health fair we kick off with our community health fair on the 18th. And we are asking everyone to be a part of it. We're asking everyone to send out the news. We're going to post it again in the group. Read across Portmore. Again, we're asking our mentees to ensure that they have a plan along with their mentors. Our mentors along with their mentees. Then we have on the 20th, we're gonna in collaboration with Art Trust, we're gonna Career Expo over by Portmore Art Academy. I believe that is. We're gonna have our book fair on the 21st. And that goes along with some library exhibitions. Like I said, guys, we are gonna put it back in the group and we are asking for full participation, guys. This mentorship program, guys, it is very important, right? You heard Dr. Abrams. There are a lot of persons with a lot of problems. And if we as mentors can assist, you know, even one child that's going through trauma. I mean, that is the world. Remember, Jesus left the 99 and went for the one, right? So we are doing a world of good when we try to assist those that are in need, right? Some of us too might be in need, you know, but at least we are in a better or even a more mature place to say, okay, we know how to go and get the help. The younger ones, think about when you were at their age, right? And if something was happening to you, would you have somebody to go and talk to? Would you have somebody you can talk to in confidence? That is what we want in this mentorship program, guys. So we want everybody on board and we want everybody to be a part of all the activities we're doing. We want to make our mark on Portmore. And then when we are ready to extend it to Jamaica, we're doing it big. All right. So one of the things that I want to point out, guys, our banquet is on the 25th, right? You remember last year our banquet was good, really good. And this year it will be even better. All right. Church service. Our church service last year, we didn't have that many in attendance. This year, we would really like to see Eagles Wings Foundation members, mentees and mentors. We'd like to see us out in our numbers, right? We want to fill the front of the church. All right, guys, and this will be on the 24th, Saturday, the 24th of August at the Waterford Seventh-day Adventist. So guys, keep these activities in mind beginning on August 18th when we have our mentorship week. All right, look out for more in the groups. Miss Lawrence, anything that you would like to say before we go?
Okay, just that we will be publishing our first magazine in September. So we are anticipating each and everyone's support.